Hi, and welcome yet to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. The topic of the Todd Talk for this week is going to be the idea of a push-in or a co-teaching model for gifted grouping. So I've talked about other types of grouping, whether it be a magnet program or a pull-out program or cluster grouping. Probably the most challenging and yet the most rewarding of these methods would be the push-in method. And the push-in method, basically, as you can see here, is a model where basically a gifted intervention teacher or someone who is trained to work with gifted students has had specific work on how to get higher level thinking out of these students, goes into the regular ed classroom. And so you may have put all of your gifted kids in one particular classroom, and so this teacher goes into that classroom and works with that teacher in order to meet the needs of those students, just as a special ed person would push into a regular ed classroom and meet the needs of their special ed students. So you might be doing small groups, you might be doing collaborative work, you might be setting up different types of differentiation, so helping come up with different assignments that are more challenging for the gifted kids. But basically, the role of this teacher is that they are co-teaching. And that can be a really tricky thing. So another thing to consider when it comes to pull-out is that the role of this gifted teacher is going to be different than it would be a regular classroom. So the first and foremost, probably most important, is to promote differentiation strategies. We use the word differentiation a lot in education, and yet some people, I don't think, have a good grasp on what it actually is. Differentiation is simply making the lesson different to meet the needs of those students. So if that means you have to make it more challenging for gifted students because they're able to think at a higher level or at a quicker pace, then you're going to challenge them maybe with a higher grade level, to the assignment, or, you're going to add a level of complexity that's going to allow it to be challenging. At the same idea as at the other end with the special ed students, you're going to modify those assignments. You're going to scaffold them so that students can be successful and be able to, learn at the level that they're able to learn. And so that's what differentiation is. And as the gifted resource teacher, your role is to go in and to make sure that your gifted students are being challenged. It involves collaboration. And I would say, like, the biggest problem I've seen to co-teaching is what happens a lot of times is the gifted specialist will go in and they're simply there as an extra set of eyes or an extra hand or whatever. In order to be successful, you have to truly collaborate with one another. That means planning together. That means developing lessons together. It means coming up with the direction of the class together. It's a great benefit because then you get to learn from them and their methods of teaching and their strategies, and they get to pick up strategies that you use in working with the gifted students. And so it's a win-win situation. But it doesn't happen if the gifted teacher just goes in and just goes with the flow and does whatever the teacher tells them to do. Keep in mind, this is not a lead teacher. This is a co-teaching situation. As always, when you're working with gifted students, it's really important to teach critical thinking and creative thinking. So that means, using the higher levels of Bloom's, and making sure that students are not just learning basic facts, but they are then being able to analyze and put those facts into play. Providing resources. So whether it's a book that's more challenging than the one the class is reading, or whether it's a product that would be more challenging than maybe the regular class is doing, providing resources to these students and to the teachers is going to be really, really important. Hopefully what happens in your co-teaching with your teacher that they will learn from you, and of course you will learn from them. So this provides professional development. And so ideally speaking, after you have worked with this teacher for a little while and you've co-taught together, they then have learned how to do the strategies that you have used in the classroom. And so they'll be able to challenge students whether you're there or not. And so that's a good way to do professional development. And the other thing is to keep an eye out for for the gifted identification process. In other words, are there kids in that class that are not identified as gifted but are showing traits and characteristics of gifted students? And so, as always, the gifted specialist, your job is to be an advocate for kids, an advocate for kids who are gifted. And you try to get them identified, and you try to get them service as much as possible. So when you're doing this co-teaching, the way that this works together is that you're going to, like I said, you're going to share leadership in the classroom. So what that means is that it's not you come in and react to what the teacher is doing. This takes a little bit of work, though. This involves you sitting down and planning together and having the ability to have a co-planning or a common planning time together so that you can do this. Just because you are there for the gifted kids doesn't mean you can't work with all students. So if you have students who, for a particular lesson, are showing the ability to handle or grasp the advanced concepts, then you should let them come into your group as well. And so, this should be flexible grouping, not based on gifted, not gifted, but whether students are able to handle the lesson that is being taught and at the level that it's being taught. Again, you're equal partners in this. You are co-teachers. And so to make sure that there, of course, will be a teacher of record more than likely, but it doesn't mean that one is more important than the other. And it's important that both of you understand that, and that administration understands that as well, and what that looks like. And that means that it also means you're managing the classroom together. And if changes need made to a lesson, you are going to confer with one another. You are going to check to make sure that works. Because, with gifted students, it can go to a high level. It can go off into lots of different places. And what you don't want to do, though, is then lose sight of what it is that they're supposed to be learning. What is the main essential question or essential idea that they're supposed to be learning about? So it's important that when changes are made, that they're made as needed during the lesson. So the way this looks, I co-taught for a year with a teacher, and so the way this looked is for one period, because I had my own classes of gifted students, but then we were co-teaching a social studies class together because she didn't have her gifted certification and I did. And so as a result, what would happen is one period a day, I would go down and we would teach the class together. And so what this might look like is she might be doing a lesson and then break them into groups. And then I would run a table of my own where I would be calling kids over and asking them what they were doing and challenging them to try to, do it at a more complex level than they would have had they just been in the regular classroom. Other things that I did was when we planned together, I came up with different options for products, and we gave these options to all students, but what generally happened is the gifted kids tended to gravitate towards these because they challenged them, and they a lot of gifted students like a challenge or like to be to exercise that brain of theirs and to get where to learn what it is that they're capable of learning. So another thing that we would do often is when it came down to grading, I would grade the students that were gifted, and she would grade the students who had not been identified as gifted in the classroom. So we kind of split the task. It wasn't even, it wasn't 50-50. And that's what co-teaching also does not mean 50-50. Co-teaching means that you are meeting the needs of the kids in the classroom. So I would often grade the students who were gifted. And sometimes I had a different rubric or different expectations than she did. But again, and then people would say, well, that's not fair because one kid got a grade for doing lesser work. But the point is not about fairness between the students. It's about challenging a student where they're at. So if I could provide feedback that is going to challenge that student to think, if I could provide an insight into trying something that they hadn't been willing to try before but were able to, that's going to be all for the better for that student because it's going to help them to grow as a learner. And so that is the co-teaching model. Or the push-in model. Like I said, it is probably the most difficult to do. But again, if it's done correctly, what happens is there's a nice exchange of strategies and learning between the two teachers and the two groups of students. So the gifted specialist is working with gifted students, but also maybe some of the regular ed students are able to handle that. And at the same time, maybe there are gifted kids who aren't able to handle something, and so they're working with a regular ed teacher on that and going at a different pace because that's the pace they're able to handle. But so you set this up in your classroom by having them as partners and making sure that you carve out times for them to be partners. In other words, you don't have a teacher traveling from building to building and does not have common planning time together. It's very important that you have those things, because there's a lot of things that can go right with co-teaching, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And co-teaching will need the support of the building administrators and making sure that everyone understands their roles and everyone understands what it is that they're supposed to be doing, and which is to be challenging students where they're at.